Hey everybody, Yankee here. You know, over the last few days, we've been paying a lot of attention to the new Smith & Wesson revolvers with no locks. And several of these guns have been 442 and 432 series guns. And a lot of people refer to these as hammerless revolvers. I've had people do it in my comment section, and people have done it on the internet for years. Well, the truth is, these guns are not hammerless. They have a hammer. They just don't have an exposed spur that you can thumb back for single action. You know, they don't need you to see their hammer. They're not trying to impress anyone. They have innies instead of outies. And that's a perfectly acceptable medical condition. It can happen to anybody, and it does not make them less of a man. I will not hear that. But with that being said, these hammers function the same way a regular hammer does. It's just that they're double action only because you can't thumb them back. Well, when I pointed that out to one of my viewers, they said, well, what's the difference between an internal hammer and a striker? How do striker-fired guns function differently than in guns that have internal hammers? So I thought I would take a moment today to explain those differences, how they are different, and which one is far better. If you look at a striker-fired gun like this Glock here, you'll see the main component is the actual firing pin, the striker. Now this striker, when the gun is ready to fire, is held rearward by a sear, and it is under spring tension. It's ready to go. The energy is already there. All you have to do is pull that trigger and release that sear, and that allows that spring to force the striker forward, striking and igniting the round. That's why these triggers are so light, because that energy is already there. That spring has already been compressed. And then that striker springs back just a little bit, kind of into a neutral position. Now, if this gun doesn't cycle for some reason, say you have a dud round, the bad thing about striker is you don't have double strike capabilities. So once it does that, you have to manually reset the gun. You have to cycle that slide, eject the round, and reset that striker. You have to put that striker back in a position where it's ready to go, and the sear has to reset, which also pushes the trigger forward. If you notice, when you fire your Glock, if it doesn't cycle, the trigger stays to the back. That's because you have to reset everything by either having the round cycle the slide or you manually cycling the slide. This gun is basically single action because when you pull that trigger, only thing you're doing is releasing that sear. The energy's already there. It's ready to go. When you look at an internal hammer on a Smith & Wesson here, you can see that hammer's there, just doesn't have that spur sticking out of the gun. That's why the gun has a little bit more of a hump back there, so it can actually completely enclose that hammer. Now with this configuration, these are double action, so when you pull the trigger, it's actually doing two things. It's cocking that hammer. It's creating the energy needed to force it forward and ignite the round. And when you pull it back a certain degree, it actually pulls the hammer back, and then when it pulls back a little further and breaks and releases the sear, it allows the energy from the hammer spring to force that hammer forward, striking the firing pin, which is a separate thing in this gun, which strikes the round and ignites it. And then when you release that trigger, the hammer goes back to its neutral position. Now the biggest difference here is, since this is double action, once it's in its neutral position, you just pull the trigger again. You don't have to worry about that recocking. You're generating the energy every time you pull the trigger, which is why the trigger's a little heavier. Every time you pull that trigger, you're cocking that hammer, it's releasing at a certain point, striking the firing pin and firing the round. And you can keep doing this for as long as you have ammo. Even if you hit a dead round, you just pull the trigger again, it keeps going. Unlike in a striker-fired gun where if you hit a dead round, like I said, you got to manually cycle everything. So as you can see, these two mechanisms couldn't be more different. With the internal hammer, it's double action. Every time you pull that trigger, you're cocking the hammer, creating that potential energy, and releasing that sear, letting the hammer go forward. You're doing two things, double action trigger. With the striker, you're only doing one thing. You're just releasing the sear. That potential energy with the spring is created by the round cycling the slide, or you cycling the slide if you have to, on your first shot, or if you have a failure. So they're completely different. Now, which one is vastly superior? Well, it depends on what you're doing. If you're shooting for speed, like you're competition shooting, or you're running gunning, you're probably going to want that faster striker trigger. It's great for that. It's hard to beat because it's going to be very light each time. The gun's doing a lot of the work. The round's doing a lot of the work. So that's going to allow you to be much quicker with your gun. Now, if you're just defending yourself, well, I think the internal hammer is far superior Because it's more robust, it's sturdier. You're less likely to have a failure, especially if it's bad ammo, because if it's bad ammo on the other gun, like I said, you got to stop, recycle that gun. If it's a bad round on the revolver, the internal hammer, you just pull the trigger again. That's much better. And like I said, the mechanism itself is much sturdier. Since it's not just a little sear interacting with a striker holding back the pressure of that spring, you're less likely to have a failure. There's less likely to be a mechanical failure. You're less likely to have your gun joggled real hard and have the gun go off. That doesn't happen often in striker-fired guns. Most of them are very safe, but it's still potential. It can happen, and it is more likely with them. Even though it's a tiny chance, it's a bigger chance than with a revolver. And the actual mechanism of the striker and the hammer, when you compare them, the hammer's just more robust, it's more controlled, it's more enclosed, it's just a better overall system as far as longevity, performance, etc. So I prefer the internal hammer, but I don't think that's going to surprise anyone. But whichever one is best for you doesn't matter. The main point of this was just to show the differences between the two and, well, to explain why I think the internal hammer is better and to explain the difference between an internal hammer and an external hammer. Just think of it, the internal hammer doesn't have anything to prove and doesn't care if you laugh at it in the gym shower. Hey, everybody. If you look at the snoo, firing pin, and the main mechanism, that, and this is a perfectly medical say, and that is a perfectly, and then once you pull the hammer back, but here's the thing, that is not the same thing, and when I am pointed, and when I am not reset, it, in the last few days we've taken a look at a lot of the, and the majority of I wanted to take a point. God damn! Hear that? Paying a lot of attention, making them less hammerless. No, they're have that. That's going to be the God fucking damn how differently they function.